Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Tottenham by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Hodgson, Julian Speroni and Connor Wickham after the game. So let's begin. An impressive display by Palace saw them move into the FA Cup 5th round by beating Tottenham Hotspur 2-0 at Selhurst Park, thanks to goals from Connor Wickham and Andros Townsend. Wickham's 8-minute opener set the tone for a memorable afternoon for the Eagles, as the striker netted his first goal in over 2 years, and that was followed by Andros Townsend converting from a penalty spot against the team he began his career at. Spurs then missed a great chance to get back into contention when Kieran Trippier missed a spot kick of his own just before half-time, and that allowed Hodgson's team to confidently see out the rest of the game against a toothless Tottenham and move a step closer to Wembley. Wickham was handed his first start for 26 months, but it took him just 8 minutes to end over 2 years of frustration by returning to the scoresheet. Jeffrey Slutt burst into the box and got around Davinson Sanchez to shoot goalwards, and after Pablo Gazzaniga parried the effort away, Wickham nudged the ball over the line from a few yards out and allowed the pent-up emotion to pour out of him. That saw a pulsating first 45 begin to bubble, and Lucas Moura whipped a shot just over the Homesdale goal before Patrick Vanano saw a clean hit from 30 yards head straight at Gazzaniga. But in 34 minutes, the Eagles were literally handed a golden chance to take a huge step into round 5. Wilfried Zaha whipped in a dangerous cross, and under pressure from Wickham, Kyle Walker-Peters knocked the ball away from the striker with his arm, an incident so blatant that VAR wasn't required to back up Kevin Friend's penalty decision. And with no Luka Milivojevic on the field, Townsend took the spot kick duties and whacked the ball past Gazzaniga. Having netted against his former club, 2 minutes later Townsend had a huge opportunity to do it again, when Vanano pushed down the left and unselfishly cut the ball back to the winger, but this time the Spurs keeper was equal to the attempt to keep his team in the game and indeed the cup. But to progress, Spurs now had to score twice, and they spent the rest of the half squandering opportunities. 4 minutes before the break, Palace lost concentration at a set piece, and a cute free-kick routine seemed certain to allow the undetected George Kevin Nkudu to slide the ball home, but Julian Speroni made a superb double save, stopping the initial effort at point-blank range before scrambling back to his feet and blocking the Frenchman's follow-up. An incredible first half then had its final twist on 43 minutes, when Spurs earned themselves a penalty when Vanano clumsily challenged Hunt Foyth to allow Trippier his own opportunity to convert from 12 yards. However, he screwed his spot kick well wide of the target as the hosts escaped down the tunnel with their 2-goal lead intact. Another excellent Speroni stop was required once play continued, as he showed good reactions to tip a deflected Fernando Llorente shot away from the bottom corner, but as the second half rolled on, Palace were more than content to soak up the visitors' pressure and put plenty of men behind the ball, which meant that Spurs couldn't find a way through Hodgson's well-organised side. In fact, it was Palace who came the closest to scoring the game's third goal, when 6 minutes before the end, a counter-attack ended with Gazzaniga saving a low Zaha shot. And as the Palace defence held firm, Speroni broke the club's all-time clean sheet record with his 112th shutout, overtaking Nigel Martin in the process to complete a perfect day for the Eagles. So now I'm going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts on both Twitter and Facebook, then of course do head over there and also follow our own account at Crystal Palace, because like I said already, it is a great place to get all the latest Palace news. Now whether that be during the transfer window where you want to keep up to date with all the latest rumours, which of course we do regularly update, or whether it's just the fact you want to sort of kept up to date with all the latest just general Palace news, so whether that be interviews with players, general news about the club, whether that be about the academy or developments with the stadium, and of course after the game as well we do also post our own opinion as well. So if you do want another Palace account to follow on both Twitter and Facebook, obviously mainly where you can get news, but also where you can read interviews, get sort of general news about the club, rather than just a view in the podcast, you can actually read the views of other people who run the page and basically get sort of their view of the game as well, or the lineup, whatever it is about Palace, which we of course give our opinion on. And of course do head over there because we obviously like to share our opinion. So if you are someone who wants another account to follow, of course feel free to do that, or even if you might have a different view to us and you see us on Twitter, of course, you know, give us a comment, give us a reply, because obviously we do like to have discussions in that respect. Now, another great place for you to share your opinion is in your YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, and that is of course with 10 being the best. Now, the main reason I want you to do that is basically so that rather than me just having my basic opinion of the game, I can go into the comment section, read what you guys thought about the game, and basically compare how you thought the players performed in terms of your player ratings, and basically compare that to how I thought, and basically that just gives me a better idea of the game as a whole, rather than me just having my single view. I can basically read and have discussions with other people, so I can get a more broader view of the game, and I suppose the same could go to you as well. You guys can read the comment section as well as listening to my opinion, so you can get a more broader, sort of more wider view of the game itself. And that's the reason I want you to do that, is so that we can all get involved. And you know, say if you disagree with something that I've put there, then of course the comment section on YouTube gives you the best place for you just to comment below, give any questions, and basically for you to share your opinion. So if you are someone who wants to get involved with, you know, giving your player ratings, or even if you don't want to do that, just giving your general views of the game, you know, how you thought Tottenham played, how good you think our goals was in terms of the build up to it, anything like that regarding the game, then of course feel free to comment that below. But like I've said already, the main reason for that is just so I can come back to the video and read what you guys, the listeners, had to say, but also so that any other fans who come to the video, you know, whether they be Tottenham or Palace fans, rather than them just listening to my voice and listening to my views of in the podcast, they can actually go into the comment section as well, and not only have a discussion with other fans, but also just, you know, build up their own opinion by reading what others have to say. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've already mentioned, and of course, you know, do check all the links that will be in the description below, and of course that also does include the Facebook group, so if you do want to join that, then of course you know, we'll accept you into that. Now, before I go on and, you know, move on to the player ratings, I'm just going to give you a small summary like I do for cup games, you know, and I say this almost every cup game, and it's not because I personally don't disregard the cup, but because some people are not really as interested in the cup as they are in the league, albeit I think there was a little bit more interest in this cup game, mainly because it was against Tottenham as opposed to a low league side. But nevertheless, it's a cup game. Not many people are, I'm not saying people are not interested in it, but not as many people are concerned or as interested in the cup as they are in the league. So because of that, I'm just going to give you a small summary of all of the players, as opposed to in terms of my sort of in-depth analysis of every single part of the players' performances. So I'm just going to sort of brush over all of the players, and as I go along, I might as well just add in a few bits here and there about the team performance and basically what I thought about the game and the lineup itself. So like I said already, cup game, not many people are as interested, so I'm really just going to skim over it and basically give you a small summary for those. The main reason for that is, you know, let's say you're not interested, all you want to do, you want to just hear, you know, what a fan thought about the game, what you thought about the performance, and basically see whether our sort of second string side in the cup done a decent job. And I suppose some people are not interested in the cup until we get to the later stages, if we get there, so touch wood we do get there. But, you know, nevertheless, I've got to cater for everyone. So I'm still going to give you my normal, you know, player ratings in terms of looking at the players, but obviously not in much detail to cover you guys. Now, obviously, like I've said already, it was a second string side, albeit there was a few, you know, first team players. You know, you've got Andros, Townsend, you've got Wilfried Zaha. So we had a few players in that starting 11, which of course would start in the league. And, you know, I think they gave us a real nice mix. So even though it was a second string side, the fact that we had a mixture between, you know, your potent attackers in, you know, Zaha and Townsend, and you had the experience of Scott Dan and, you know, Julian Speroni at the back. So we had a nice mix in the side, and all seconds. The fact that we put in a good shift and defended really well against this Tottenham side really just goes to show that, albeit sometimes people say we haven't got much of a squad, but when you've got people like Martin Kelly, like Scott Dan, like Joe Ward, you know, who can come into the side and perform as well as they did against, albeit it was a second string Tottenham side as well, but a team of their quality, the fact that they can come into the side, having not played much this season, and perform as well as they did, was of course great to see. So in terms of the cup, people normally say, oh, because it's a second string side, it doesn't really matter. But actually, in this respect, it actually doesn't really matter for me personally, because it's a few players here, a few squad players actually showing that actually, you know, the quality they've got, and they show that they're actually quite capable of coming into the side, which of course is what you want. You look at the beginning, we lost out to Middlesbrough, I believe it was, in the Carabao Cup. That was a quite disappointing performance with people coming into the side. So in terms of this game here, even though it was a second string side mostly, the fact that we still performed as well as he did, not only defensively but offensively as well, in terms of our counter-attacking ability on the limited time we had the ball. So the fact that both our defensive and offensive work was good, it was obviously excellent, but the fact that we combined that sort of play in the game with the fact that it was our second string side was something that was really quite impressive for me, because certainly especially Scott Dann in particular, who hasn't played much football since his injury, the fact that he come into the side and arguably he's got to be up there as one of our better players, especially defensively, you've got to got to give credit where it is due. Now I might as well stop rubbiting on, and I might as well move on to the player rating. So I'm going to start in goal with Julian Speroni, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now in terms of his performance, obviously he's a club legend and we know that, and he came up for a little bit of criticism at the weekend because of the mistake he made against Liverpool, but the thing that just puts his legend status even more is just how well he came back from that mistake by putting in such a good performance here against Spurs, and that's the reason I've given him an 8. And of course, throughout the game he made loads of fantastic saves, one in particular which was a double save from Nkudu. Spurs had a clever free kick, whipped the ball in at the far post. Nkudu was there free, no players around him, had a shot, Speroni saved it, rebound, saved that as well. So in that aspect, in particular, them two saves in particular was of course quite impressive. But of course, aside from that, the fact that after half time Spurs were pumping on the pressure, the fact that Speroni made up for that mistake against Liverpool so much by making crucial saves in that second half after our first half, or how good our first half performance was. The fact that I think there was one save in particular from Llorente which was literally inches from going in. So you look back at these few chances and actually, even though Speroni made that mistake against Liverpool, it really just sums up his sort of legendary status in the fact that he can pick himself up from that, not let that affect him, and actually put in a very good performance against a Tottenham side. So I do think, the fact that his performance was good that is of course the thing that was quite impressive, but the fact that he combined his good performance with the fact that he kept a clean sheet obviously moves me on to my final, and the fact that he broke the clean sheet record at the club. I think it was 112th clean sheet, which of course breaks the record. So the fact that he's now got all of the goalkeeping records in terms of appearances, clean sheets, really is a credit to him. And of course, this possibly might be his last game he ever plays for Palace, if Hennessy and Guy to come back from injury in the coming weeks or so. Now, if that is the case, this probably would have been the last we have seen of Speroni if he does indeed leave in the summer, as per the reports. So, what a way to go out. If this ends up being his last game for Palace, the fact that we got through to the next round with Speroni being one of our contenders for the man of the match by making loads of crucial saves, as well as, breaking that record as well, really just sort of epitomises his performance. And I've seen a few people give him tens, and ultimately I think the fact that he broke the record, probably could give him that, but without sort of over exaggerating it a bit, I do think an 8 is a fair reflection, when you consider how good he was in the game. And Spurs, albeit they were a relatively good side and put us under the cosh for the majority of the game, I do think at times that Speroni wasn't really Spurs didn't really test Speroni as much as they probably would have liked, but nevertheless, when he was called upon, like he always does, he made the crucial saves, which once again cements his place as a Palace legend. But like I've said, if it is the final game he did play for Palace, then what a way to go out, clean sheet against the Tottenham side into the next round of the Cup, with of course him playing a crucial role with his save. So Julian Speroni here, great save. Great saves throughout the game, which of course was combined with a good performance, and I certainly think he does deserve the 8. And I suppose the final point really is nothing really to do about his performance, but when Kieran Trippier stepped up to take the penalty, which of course he missed, Speroni did point to that side of the goal and said, you're going to put it there, you're going to put it to that side. So not only did Speroni get the right side in terms of where Trippier was kicking it, but he obviously put him off by actually playing them mind games by pointing in one area. Trippier's gone to put it in that area where Speroni was pointing, and of course he put it wide. So, once again, yes, he didn't save the penalty because it was put wide, but you could say he was one of the reasons why Trippier missed it, because obviously he was messing with the mind by pointing in the direction, and obviously Trippier tried to put it in that direction and ultimately didn't. But overall, Julian Speroni, I do think an 8 is a fair result. Now obviously moving on now to the defence, Joe Ward, I'm going to give him an 8 overall. Now in terms of his defensive performance, he was a bit shaky at the start, but as he got into the game, especially in the second half where we were under the cosh, he grew into the game and was absolutely fantastic, and that's why I've given him the 8. But aside from his fantastic defensive performance, I've just got to talk about the first goal. Now obviously Connor Wickham scored his first goal, and I think it's 799 days or something like that. So of course it's great for Connor Wickham to get the goal, but actually the build up before the goal was even better, because the goal was literally a tap and from 2 yards out. So in terms of the build up for the goal, it started with Joe Ward running down that right flank. He put a ball across the area just outside Spurs' box, and of course Jeffrey Supper's run onto it, got past 2 defenders, and obviously he's had a shot himself. It was saved by Gazzaniga, and of course Connor Wickham put in the rebound. So whilst Joe Ward was very good defensively, that sort of bit of play where he actually got up the pitch and actually found Jeffrey Schlupp in the centre so that he could run through a goal was something quite impressive. Now, of course, he's not always the best defensively, but the fact that in this game here against Tottenham, he actually, you know, the moment where it did matter, where we had to go forward, the fact that he finished off that attack by putting in a fine ball to Jeffrey Schlupp, which of course Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, ended up having a shot from, and obviously Connor Wickham scored the rebound. So the fact that he was involved in that offensive play was of course great to see, and the fact that he was looking to get so far up the pitch so early on in the game was of course great to see as well. You know, the fact that so early on we were putting on the pressure to try and get that first goal, and ultimately, obviously, even though Spurs did play good, the fact that we got that goal so early on seemed to change the whole complexion of the game. So whilst I could give Joe Ward lots of credit for his defensive duties, you've got to look at it and go, actually, he made quite a lot of impact in the game, because if it wasn't for him making that run forward, then maybe possibly we wouldn't have ended up getting that first goal. So that was obviously quite important. Now in the second half, once again, defensively fairly solid. One save in particular, or one block he made in particular from Lucas Moura. He had a free header on goal, and obviously Joe Ward was there to get his body on the line and basically block that shot. And obviously it wasn't just that Lucas Moura shot, but that was one in particular I want to pick out. Of course, other chances as well where he put his body on the line. So the fact that he combined his solid defensive first half with the fact that he got the assist in the first, or the pre-assist as I like to call it, the fact that he combined that good half, that first half performance with a second half performance which was, you know, just as good, if not better, in the fact that he was able to deal with people like Lucas Moura when Tottenham were putting on the pressure to get back into the game, was of course great to see. And in terms of his performance here, going back to that point I made about it being a second string side, obviously we know he's behind Aaron Wan-Bissaka in the pecking order at the minute, and obviously that's understandable because Wan-Bissaka's, you know, our player of the season by a mile, but actually it shows what's, even though our squad isn't the strongest, it shows that we've got players capable of coming in, and Joe Ward here, with his performance as good as it was, shows that he's fully capable, albeit maybe he's not as good as he used to be, but he's fully capable of coming into the side and putting in a shift. And that was one of the main reasons why I was impressed with him, because of how well he obviously came back into the side, and obviously combine that with how well he played. Now in terms of the centre-backs, I might as well start with Martin Kelly. I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now in terms of his performance, I do think, once again, the clean sheet, he was fairly solid throughout, but there was one little nervy moment in the first half. There was a bit of a breakdown in communication between him and Speroni. Obviously it all might have been a chance for Spurs, but ultimately nothing really came from it. So I suppose quite early you can understand, you know, Kelly not having played with Speroni in a game for a while, so you can maybe understand a bit of confusion there. But the fact that, aside from that little miscommunication, the fact that he was very solid, also stuff in the air, and the fact that, like he has done this season, he's just been Mr. Reliable, comes in, puts in a shift for the side. The fact that he's able, as good as him, to come off the bench or to play in our second string side and basically play as well as he did was of course good to see. Now of course he couldn't quite score against Tottenham, which he did last time we met them in the FA Cup, but that doesn't really matter because he's not normally a player known for scoring, but also, you know, you want him to do his defensive work, and that's certainly what he did do. Now just going back to that little bit of lack of communication, obviously for us, quite luckily for us, nothing really came off that, and that's just because, you know, Martin Kelly had enough time to clear his lines. And that's another thing, you know, if you do have a moment in the game where you have a little bit of miscommunication or you make a mistake, the best thing to do is just clear up the danger and basically make up for it. So the fact that Martin Kelly done as well as he did in terms of just clearing his lines was of course good to see as well. Now in terms of his second half, you know, Spurs were piling on the pressure, so the fact that Martin Kelly remained strong and basically just done what you would want from a defender, you know, putting his body on the line, making blocks, making challenges, you know, doing everything you would expect from him, especially against a Tottenham team who brought on some skillful, fast players in that second half. Of course, the fact that we were able to match that and the fact that we were able to see out the game was of course impressive as a whole defensive unit, but of course individually I do think Martin Kelly done a superb job there. So overall, don't really think there's much more to say about Martin Kelly, because I just think overall fairly solid, but like I've said already, I do think the 7 is a fair result. Now moving on to Scott Dann, as I've said already, he's obviously hasn't played that many games this season, but this game here I'm going to give him an 8, because I do think coming back into the side, he put in a fantastic start, he put in a fantastic performance, which was only his second start of the season. But much like Martin Kelly, I suppose the word you could use was solid, because that's exactly what it was. You know, defensively he was doing all he had to do, you know, being very physical with the especially with Llorente in particular, and basically he was just making life difficult for Tottenham. So the fact that Scott Dann, having not played in so long, the fact that he came into the side and put in as good as a performance he did was of course quite good to see. And you know, something I mention nearly every weekend now is how individual players in our team deal with the opposition players, and of course in this game here Scott Dan was obviously tasked with dealing with Fernando Llorente, so the fact that he dealt with him so much, in the fact that he didn't really have that many chances in the game, is of course credit to Dan, and I suppose you could put Kelly in there as well. And you know, one of the reasons why he done so well, not only against Fernando Llorente but against the whole Spurs team, is just because he won his fair amount of headers, you know, putting his body on the line, you know, pushing quite high up the pitch to actually win the header before it gets into the Palace box. So the fact that he was able to do that and just combine that with just that determination to not let Spurs score, that determination just to remain solid at the back, that was the thing that really did impress me, and that's why I've given him an 8 overall. You know, the reason I've given Kelly a 7 as opposed to an 8 is just because of that little bit of miscommunication early on in the game, which if you put that aside he probably would have got an 8 overall. So the fact that Scott Dan any makes like that and was still able to put in such a good performance is obviously the reason I've given an 8. But like I've said already, yes, he's probably not going to start games for us in the league, but much like Martin Kelly, it's actually nice to see that we've got players who can actually be in the squad and actually come in and play in our second string side and of course perform as well as they do. Now in terms of the final player on our back four, that is the left back Patrick Vanano. Now I'm going to give him a 6 overall because, you know, I do think it was a fairly average performance from him. You know, much like his season has been, it wasn't necessarily absolutely terrible, wasn't the greatest, and I do think a 6 is a fair result. Now in terms of, you know, players he was up against, you know, Kieran Trippier was his opposite man, obviously, that he had to deal with, and obviously with Trippier playing wing back, he obviously was getting quite far forward, so of course Vanano had a little bit of a task in terms of keeping him quiet. And I do think, aside from conceding the penalty, which of course, even though it wasn't Trippier who he fouled in the box, it was obviously Hon Foyt, but you know, the fact that that sort of really epitomised his defensive performance, in the fact that yes, Trippier lost a few times and was one of Tottenham's better players, albeit he missed the penalty, but the fact that he just had that little bit of lapse in concentration to make that tackle needlessly on Juan Foyth to give away the penalty, albeit they missed it, that was of course a little bit disappointing. But of course, like already, he'll be quite relieved that having had to deal with Kieran Trippier for the whole of that first half, it obviously would have been an even worse thing for you to concede a penalty for Trippier to score. So the fact that he missed it obviously made up, basically I suppose it made him feel a little bit better in the fact that he was not having the best of time against him. But of course, once again, Kieran Trippier, a terrible penalty, and maybe he was put off by Julian Speroni, but whatever, didn't hit the target. And I do think I'm probably sort of talking rubbish here, but you know, when you consider Vanano was up against him, you know, obviously if you score a penalty against someone who you're up against, is obviously going to put a bit of a downer on you, because obviously the person you're meant to be dealing with scored. But luckily for us, that didn't really happen. But in terms of his overall play throughout the whole game, you know, yes, he still proved to be an outlet down that left hand side. That was obviously good to see. You know, he was looking to get forward and looking to get back and deal with people like Trippier, so he wouldn't have that disappointment of Trippier scoring or putting a ball into the box and assisting. But aside from that, you know, he wasn't the best he wasn't necessarily up to the standard he has been previously, and the main reason for that is just because his final ball weren't there. Now, early on in the game, he had a shot from about 30 yards, which was destined for the bottom corner, and of course Gazzaniga made a good save. So I suppose you could say in that respect he had the final ball, but the game as a whole, he wasn't necessarily as effective as he normally has been, and maybe that's just because he's a little bit too comfortable now at left back, in the fact that he hasn't necessarily got any, I don't want to say proper competition, but he hasn't necessarily got that much competition, because, you know, his main competition in Jeffrey Schlupp is now playing in central midfield and out wide as opposed to playing at left back. So maybe it's just the fact that he's got a little bit less competition or less pressure for his position, but whatever it is, he didn't seem to perform as well as he has done previously. But I do think a 6 is a fair result when you consider, in terms of our clean sheet, he obviously played his part in that. But of course, like I've said already, even though he had to be quite alert for Kieran Trippier throughout the game in terms of stopping him inside the box, he will of course be very relieved in the fact that Kieran Trippier, on the one chance he actually had to score in the game, which obviously came from Vanano actually conceding the penalty, he'd be quite relieved that nothing did come from that. So I'm going to move on now to the midfield, obviously starting with Max Meyer, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now, of course, I talked already in terms of the changes that we made in the side, and of course Max Meyer was the player who came into the side in terms of in the replacement of James McArthur. And I do think quite early on he was obviously looking to get in the game, looking to have an influence, and I've seen a few people criticising him on Twitter, but I actually think Max Meyer had a very good performance, you know, both defensively in terms of getting back and putting in a shift against Tottenham, but also offensively as well in terms of his creativity. So I do think he had a fairly good performance overall. and fully deserving of the 7 I've given him. But in terms of quite his early interactions in the game, Nkudu obviously whacked him, hit him quite hard, quite early on in the game. So of course you can understand, when you take a hit like that, it could affect the rest of your game. And of course it did go unpunished, which I'm not really going to talk too much about, because that early on in the game, you're not really going to give someone a yellow card for something which isn't necessarily that cynical. So I suppose on our perspective, you could say maybe that could have affected Mai's game, but ultimately it didn't really in the end, so I'm not really going to sort of dwell too much on that. But the thing I really liked about his performance is the fact that, yes, he was obviously looking to get on the ball, looking to get involved, but the fact that he always seemed to be available for a pass at a time. So the fact that he was always looking to be in that position, or be in a position where he could actually get on the end of a pass, or just the fact that in terms of his defensive work, he was ready to put in a foot when necessary, or even just keep possession, even though we had like 30% possession. The fact that we had someone like Max Mai with the quality he's got to actually be able to hold on the ball was of course good to see. Now in terms of his performance here, and I talked to him replacing James McArthur, he's obviously going to give Roy Hodgson a bit of a food for thought in terms of the lineup going up against Southampton. Now personally for me, I think Roy's quite stubborn, and even though he's now started to see a little bit more flexibility in the fact that he's now changed or reverted to a 4-5-1 or a 4-3-3 in the league, of course there's going to be a little bit of debate and a bit of food for thought as to whether he would start James McArthur or Meyer. But personally for me, I think Meyer will start. I think that Meyer will probably go back to the bench for the Southampton game, and McArthur will come back in, and that's just because McArthur didn't play against Tottenham, so of course you would expect him to be fresh. But I do think, in a few weeks' time, we've got Fulham coming up. That might be a game where Max Meyer might be needed to actually break down the Fulham defence, because as he showed here against Tottenham, he's obviously very good at being available to get on the end of a pass. He's obviously very good at putting in his foot in for his defensive work, and of course the fact that in terms of his offensive play, he's actually good at keeping hold of the ball. That's something which we could of course That's something we could, of course, utilise going forward. So for me personally, I do think, Max Meyer will probably be on the bench again for the Southampton game, but maybe against Fulham, where we need someone with that sort of clinical edge, or someone with that bit of quality to break the team down, then maybe, he could find a place in the side there. But Max Meyer here, even though quite a lot of people weren't impressed with his performance, I certainly was, and that's why I've given him a 7. I do think that even though he took that whack quite early on from Nkudu in the game, the fact that he was looking to get on the end of passes, looking to put a foot in, as well as keeping the ball and moving it at pace, that was something which really did quite impress me. So I do think overall, Max Meyer, I do think he does deserve this 7 I've given him. So now I'm going to move on to the second player in our central midfield, and that is of course Cheku Kouyaté, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now, much like Meyer, I do think that, I thought that, and I put it on Twitter before the game, I thought we were going to get overrun in the midfield, and that's just because we reverted back to a 4-4-2. We only had 2 players in midfield central midfield with Kouyaté and Meyer, so I thought actually before the game we might get overrun. But actually, considering the fact that I've given Meyer a 7 and Kouyaté an 8, it really just goes to show how well they played in midfield. And actually, all of the worries I had before the game in the fact they would get overrun was actually sort of put aside, not just because of how well Meyer and Kouyaté performed, but actually it wasn't necessarily a 4-4-2, and it was more of a 4-3-3 with Jeffrey Supp sort of slotting inside. And actually, as a midfield 3, I think they've done really well, not just because of how well they performed individually, but I think the balance they gave us in terms of the pace, the skill and the tenacity from all 3 of them obviously seemed to work well. Now in terms of Kouyaté's performance, his main job was obviously winning the ball back, giving that protection to the back 4, and that's certainly what he did. And when you consider, even though it was a second string Spurs side, the Spurs have still got some players who could hurt us on the counter-attack. So the fact that we had someone like Kouyaté who could not only give protection to the back 4, but actually, given the fact that we had limited possession, he could actually win the ball back as well, was something that really did impress me. And I suppose the word to use is tenacity. The fact that he had that energy, he kept going, was giving his all for the team, trying to win the ball back, giving the protection to the back 4. So the fact that he was doing everything you'd expect from a player with tenacity, essentially, that was of course good to see. And that's one of the reasons I've given him an 8, just because of that word tenacity. That's really how I thought, or that's really the only way I can really describe his performance, because that is exactly what it was. Now, obviously, he done all of that, which you would expect him to do, but he also done more. So the fact that doing what you would expect from a ball-winning central midfielder, you know, in terms of getting the ball back. But the fact that he done all of that, but also just done, you know, much more in the game in terms of looking to get forward, looking to carry the ball forward. So the fact that he was doing what you'd expect from him, especially against the Tottenham side with quality, you know, especially Lucas Moura in particular, the fact that he was able to do that, plus even more to make that impact on the game, was of course really good to see. And for me personally, you know, I've talked quite a lot this season in terms of he's one of the first names on the team sheet now because of how well he performed. But this game here, once again, was a very impressive showing from him, not just because of his general sort of defensive play in terms of winning the ball back or giving protection to the back four, but just his general midfield play, you know, combining that defensive work with that ability to go forward and just basically give more than what you're expected to do in terms of protecting the back four. The fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see. And albeit it was in the FA Cup and it was against the second string side, I don't think there can be any arguments against this being one of his best performances in a Palace shirt, if not the best, because I do think how he performed in the side, you know, how well he was against, you know, or how well he performed against his Tottenham side, as well as just the composure and that tenacity as well. Coming back to that word, the tenacity he had inside was of course something that really did impress me. So overall, I do think the midfield as a whole, in terms not just because of how well they played in that position, but how well they done both defensively and offensively as a unit, I think they done well. But actually individually, I do think Kouyaté was obviously one of the you know, one of the players in midfield who of course impressed me the most. So I do think an 8 overall is a fair result. Now in terms of Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, obviously before the game, like I've said already, I thought we were going to get overrun in midfield, but because Jeffrey Schlupp was playing in a more central position, you know, almost in a three-man midfield, it actually didn't see us get overrun in the midfield. And the main reason for that is just because of how Jeffrey Schlupp is in terms of that, even though he's not the most physical player, but that physicality sort of, and the fact that he's got the pace, that really seemed to help us in midfield, and it really gave us the balance. The fact that we had that creativity and that sort of technical ability from Maya, the fact that we had that tenacity and physicality from Kouyaté, as well as the pace in midfield from Schlupp, that really did seem to help us in the game. Now, like I said already, he was obviously in that trio, and albeit we probably won't see that in the Premier League, in the fact that, you know, Kouyaté and Kouyaté will probably stay in the side, and of course McArthur will place Maya and Luke will come back in. Yes, we probably won't see a trio of Schlupp, Kouyaté and Maya, but actually the fact that they can play well as a three-man midfield goes to show that if we have to change something up, then of course that could be a valid option for us going forward. Now, the thing that most impressed me about Jeffrey Schlupp is, yes, he'd done his midfield work, which of course you would expect him to do, but because he had that freedom of playing in that central midfield role, it gave him lots of opportunities to get forward. And of course, because he's got the pace and he's got that ability and that agility, I suppose, as well, he was obviously a very useful asset for us, because whenever we were breaking forward, we could obviously utilise his pace, but also that agility to get inside the box. And we obviously saw that with the goal that we scored, in the fact that he obviously had the pace to get on the end of Joe Ward's cross, had that physicality, I suppose, to outmuscle Davinson Sanchez, and of course, albeit he may not be the best finisher at the club, the fact that he was able to wriggle his way into the box, have a shot through on goal, force Gazzaniga into a save, and of course Connor Wickham was obviously on hand to make sure that, you know, we were able to finish that and make sure that that sort of fantastic chance from Schlupp wasn't wasted. So not only was he doing his job in midfield really well, but actually the opportunities that he actually got to go forward, he was using to his full potential. He was actually basically making use of his attributes. You know, he's got pace, so he used it in the game. He was making sure he can get forward as quick as possible. So that was something that of course really did impress me. And of course, if you had to pick out one moment from the game, it would of course been that, because if Gazzaniga hadn't have made the save, then Schlupp probably wouldn't have scored. But goes back to that point as well, you know, the fact that he was looking to get forward in every opportunity was great. So the fact that when the ball came to him from Joe Ward, he was able to continue his run into the box, outmuscle Davinson Sanchez, whilst obviously putting a challenging ball to the goalkeeper, which of course he parried into Connor Wickham's path. The fact that he was involved in our goal, which of course I've said already, changed the game. You know, if we hadn't have scored the goal so early on, then maybe Tottenham would have, you know, settled more into the game. So the fact that we got that at such an important time so early on in the game really did seem to help us. So the fact that, you know, Jeffrey Schlupp was involved with that was of course good. And in terms of, you know, doing his midfield work in the second half, we were a lot more under the cosh than we were in the first half, and that's just because Tottenham were looking to find a way back into the game. So the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, put aside his ability going forward like he had in the first half and concentrated more on the defensive work was of course good to see. You know, the fact that he helped by tracking back defensively and helping the likes of Kouyaté by just giving that extra line of protection in front of the back four. So the fact that he was able to do his offensive work and basically have so much impact in the first half. We got the goal, we were 2 goals ahead, so he basically made the impact in that respect. And of course the second half was all about seeing that out. So the fact that he had that impact in the first half by getting us the goal, and then or setting up the assist for the goal, and the fact that he was able to carry on the rest of the game by seeing that out was of course great to see. So I do think overall I do think the 8 for Jeffrey Schlupp is of course fully deserved. So we're going to move on now to one of our wide players, and that is of course Andros Townsend. I'm going to give him an 8 overall. Now you can see sort of a recurring theme here, with 7s and 8s, and that's just because as a whole the team was of course very good. Now Townsend in particular, against his former side, the fact that he performed as well as he did was of course good to see. And when you consider he's arguably our most on-form player at the minute, it was of course good to see him get yet another goal for Palace. Now, in terms of his performance here, he was obviously up against Kyle Walker-Peters, and of course, you've got the inexperience of Kyle Walker-Peters, and of course you've got the experience of Andros Townsend. So of course you could say that was a bit of a mixed match. And whilst on the most part Kyle Walker-Peters done all right against him, the fact that he gave away that silly penalty when Connor Wickham was in the box and he, they were looking to head the ball, and of course Walker-Peters obviously put his hand there. So the fact that we had that opportunity from the penalty, obviously against his former club, he had a chance to score. Obviously, I personally wanted Connor Wickham to take it because he hasn't scored in so long, so it would have been nice for him to get a brace. But obviously, up stepped Andros Townsend from that mistake by Kyle Walker-Peters, stepped up to take the penalty. Fantastic penalty right down the middle, deceived the goalkeeper, obviously to make it 2-0 to Palace. So, whilst his overall performance was good, the fact that he was up against Kyle Walker-Peters, and the one time he got the better of him, albeit he wasn't involved in the handball, but the fact that he got the better of him by actually scoring from the penalty that Kyle Walker-Peters conceded, it really just goes to show, in terms of that battle, you've got to argue that obviously Andros Townsend did win that. Now, of course, playing against your former club, it could sometimes affect you, but the fact that Andros Townsend didn't really let that affect him and played as well as he did offensively by constantly, when we were getting the ball to him, he was literally running down the flank looking to get the ball in. So the fact that even though we were under the cosh for quite a lot of the game, when you consider the possession that Spurs had, the fact that we had someone like Townsend with that tenacity to go forward and basically attack the opposition at every opportunity was of course good to see. And like I said already, Kyle Walker-Peters made a mistake, albeit it was with Connor Wickham, they were battling together, but nevertheless gave us that chance for a penalty, and of course Andros Townsend obliged and scored from it. So it's nice to see someone else score a penalty, but also it's reassuring to see that we've actually got someone in the squad who's actually capable of scoring a penalty. We've had Kabay in recent years miss penalties, we've had obviously Benteke miss penalties, so it's nice to see we've got someone else in the squad who can of course take the penalty. Now of course shortly after he scored that penalty, he had another great chance to make it 3-0. Obviously a great run by Vanana. Yes, Vanana wasn't great in the game, but this one chance he had in the game, bolted down that left hand side, and rather than taking the ball himself, he obviously put a fantastic ball into the box for Andros Townsend to score. Hit it first time, and obviously Gazaniga made the save, but obviously from quite close range, obviously you could say maybe he should have been doing better by actually putting it away from the goalkeeper. But when the ball's coming in so fast, your first instinct's going to hit it first time. Got a great connection on it, great power, but of course Gazaniga was there to make a save. But what a story that would have been if Townsend had scored that literally minutes after he'd got the penalty, 2 goals against his former club. Maybe, really could have changed the complexion of the game, because if we're 3-0 up at that point in the first half, then maybe we could have gone on to get a few more in the second half, or maybe Spurs could have ramped up the pressure even more. So if that had gone in, maybe it could have changed the game overall. But the main thing for me that I was obviously impressed with is not, the fact that he scored the goal. He was obviously brilliant up against Kyle Walker-Peters, and not just the fact that he had loads of chances himself to score. It's just the fact that he once again proved what a useful option he is for Palace, in the fact that he's able to take us up the pitch as well as he did, and actually relieve pressure from the up against the Spurs pressure. So the fact that we've got someone like him, who of course can be great offensively, but when it does matter, when we're under the cosh from opposition, the fact that we've got someone like Andros Townsend who could obviously give us yardage by actually moving the ball up the pitch, was also basically relieving our pressure by actually on the counter attack just keep the ball, get the ball forward so he can reorganise and but yeah, essentially get reorganised at the back. So the fact that we've got a player who can not only do great offensive work, but actually when it does matter, when we're under the cosh, he can also relieve pressure by actually getting the ball away, and basically sort of going up against the Spurs pressure was of course great to see. So overall, Andros Townsend, playing against his former club, obviously done a great job, attacking down the left or the right hand side, wherever he was for different periods of the game. So the fact that he was able to do that whilst also, you know, scoring a penalty from the spot by remaining very calm against his former club. So the fact that he was able to do that, as well as having a few other chances in the game, as well as just basically being a very useful player for us in the fact that he got us, you know, I suppose you could say 10-15 yards further up the pitch when we were under pressure from Spurs. So the fact that he could do that was, of course, good to see. So I'm going to move on now to the striker, or our first forward, you know, whichever way you look at our formation. I personally think it was a 4-4-2 at times, or a 4-5-1. Whichever way you look at it, Connor Wickham was the main focal point in the team. And I do think he had a fairly good performance, and that's why I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now, of course, you know, we had the likes of Jordan Ayew and Christian Benteke on the bench, and of course, there was quite a lot of debate before the game as to who would start. So actually, it was nice to see Connor Wickham get a start in the team. I think it was his first start in God knows how long, you know. I think it was since the Swansea game where he got injured. So it was nice to see him come back onto the pitch and actually get his first start for the club. And, you know, what a game it was. You know, not only did he have a fairly good offensive performance in the fact that he was very physical up top and winning balls, but the fact that he got a goal, you know, I think it was his first goal in 799 days or something like that. So that was obviously a relief for him in the fact that he's come back from injury and got over loads of hurdles. So the fact that he now scored was obviously a relief for him. But actually, I do think aside from the goal, he had a very good offensive performance. Now, in terms of our options, you know, we had Jordan Ayew, we could have started Christian Benteke, but actually I do think Connor Wickham, the fact that he's a few weeks ahead of Christian Benteke and the fact that we want to start Jordan Ayew in the league, it obviously was quite understandable why Connor Wickham started. And something we haven't seen from our strikers this season is the fact that they're taking their chances up top. So it was nice to see Connor Wickham when he got on chance in the box, albeit it was from 2 yards out, at least he finished it, because loads of times this season we haven't finished chances. So the fact that when the ball came to him after, you know, Jeffrey Stark caused that save of Gazaniga, the fact that Connor Wickham was able to put the goal home after 8 minutes was of course good to see. And essentially, you know, Roy Hodgson had the faith to actually start Connor Wickham despite him not playing much this season. The fact that he repaid that confidence and that faith in him after 9 minutes to obviously tap home from that rebound was of course good to see. And I you know, I've said this already, but you know, I said it with Jordan Ayew. You know, as soon as Jordan Ayew scored his first goal, he went on to score a second goal, and his performances since have been very good. So hopefully he can have a sort of similar impact here with Connor Wickham. You know, he's finally got over his injuries, touch wood, and hopefully he can continue to get better and better the more he plays, because a performance like this, albeit he scored a tap-in from 2 yards out, this is going to do his confidence a world of good by scoring his first goal since injury, and hopefully that'll help him push on this season. Now obviously after the goal, especially sort of the second half that he was playing, he didn't really do that much afterwards, but you know, what you want from a striker, you want a striker to be clinical. So the fact that he was clinical in the fact that he got one chance, or one superb chance, the fact that he finished that was of course good to see. But, you know, going back to the fact that he scored the goal so early on, it was so important in terms of us getting ahead and getting that control of the game. That really did seem to be a game-changing moment in the fact that if we hadn't have scored when we did, then maybe Spurs would have put a bit more pressure on us. So the fact that we got the goal and, you know, Connor Wickham made his mark so early on in the game was, of course, good to see. And, you know, that's something that fans will always remember. You know, he's obviously had this hard time with injuries, so, of course, we'll all remember, you know, the goal he scored after injury, and the fact that he showed as much passion as he did as well. That's something we're going to remember as well, because, you know, he does deserve it after the horror he's been through with his injuries. So of course it was great to see him get the goal there. But overall, very good offensive performance, and certainly does deserve this 7 I've given him. And of course, Christian Benteke was the replacement for him, just on the hour mark, and that's just because neither player have played much this season. So of course, Connor Wickham's done a shift, got a goal, take him off, and obviously give Christian Benteke a run out. Now, in terms of our final player, that was of course Wilfried Zaha. You know, depending on which way you look at our formation, you could say he was playing up top with Connor Wickham, or he was playing out wide. Whichever way you look at it, he was playing as one of our most forward players, and I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now, he wasn't necessarily one of our worst players on the pitch, or obviously all of our players put in good performances, but I don't want to say it was necessarily worse than anyone else. It's just the fact that A, Spurs defended relatively well against him, and B, it wasn't necessarily a lack of not trying from him. It's just the fact that, you know, he had a few shots and Gazaniga saved them, and he wasn't necessarily getting the freedom he would have liked. So even though it was a bit of a frustrating game for Zaha in the fact that a couple of fouls didn't go his way, or a few shots Gazaniga saved, so obviously you can understand him being a little bit frustrated. But actually, aside from that, I do think he had a fairly effective offensive performance. You know, he wasn't necessarily brilliant, but he was quite effective in the fact that there was, you know, one chance in particular, put a fantastic floated cross to the back post, which of course was handled by Kyle Walker-Peters. So the fact that he obviously caused Kyle Walker-Peters to actually handball the ball in the first place by obviously putting in such a dangerous cross that if he had ignored it, then maybe Connor Wickham could have gotten the end of it. So the fact that he put in a cross, which of course forced Kyle Walker-Peters to make the mistake, was of course good to see. And you know, we would have liked to see a little bit more from him like that in the game, because there were loads of chances in the game where obviously he was a bit, I don't want to say selfish, but he was hogging onto the ball a little bit too long. So if he had put in a few more floated crosses into the box with the likes of Connor Wickham or Christian Benteke when he came on, if we had done that a few more by putting in crosses, you know, we saw with the first one he could force the defender to make a mistake. So if we had seen a little bit more from Wilfried Zaha, and the fact that he was putting crosses into the box, that would have been better. But like I've said already, you know, the first goal was obviously important in terms of Jeffrey Slupp's run, and of course, you know, that's one, you know, I said it was quite a key moment in the game, because you get the goal so early on and it gives you that chance to cement your lead. So the fact that we were able to make it 2-0 just before, well, I suppose sort of 10 minutes before half time, of course Andros Townsend scored it, so of course he's going to get applauded. But the fact that Zaha put in that cross, which of course caused Kyle Walker-Peters to make the mistake, was of course great to see. And you know, even though Zaha wasn't necessarily at his best, it was still a fairly effective performance in the fact that when he got the ball, or when we were on the counter-attack, he was able to put pressure on the Spurs defence. I just think it wasn't necessarily his day, or a few fouls he weren't getting, which you could argue he should have got. So even though it was slightly disappointing, I do think he had overall a fairly good performance. And you know, one of the reasons for that is just because he was up to his usual tricks and skills and flicks. And even though he wasn't necessarily heavily involved in all of our counter-attacking opportunities, that's just mainly because other players stepped up in the team. So obviously before, we've always relied on Wilfried Zaha, everything went through him. So actually, even though he's not playing as great as he has been previously, but it's nice to see other players around him, especially on the counter-attack, actually, you know, stepping up to the plate. So it's good to see that across the board, even though Zaha wasn't great, the fact that he was still able to put in a fairly good performance, you know, hence why I've given him a 6, was of course good to see. And like I've said already, you know, you've really got to give him credit, albeit in the whole game he wasn't necessarily the greatest, but you know, the fact that he caused Kyle Walker-Peters to make that mistake in the first place is of course one thing in particular that I really of course wanted to highlight. So I'm just going to move on to the subs. You know, there's not really too much to say about them, but of course Christian Benteke, Luka Milivojevic and Jordan Ayew were the 3 subs we made on the day. Obviously Christian Benteke, I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Main reason for that is just because he was working his way back to sharpness, and he put himself about a bit up top, you know, was looking to win balls, looking to run the channels. So the fact that he came on, you know, put in a fairly decent performance, and he obviously, he still looked a little bit rusty, but the fact that he was looking to, or looked like he was slowly getting back to his best, was of course good to see. But the thing I really liked is that obviously he came on for Wickham, so it was sort of a target man for a target man substitution. So the fact that that was our aim, you know, get the ball up to Benteke like we had been doing with Wickham, the fact that we continued to do that, and the fact that Benteke sort of put himself about a bit, looked to get involved, was of course good to see. So I'm going to give him a 6, because albeit he didn't necessarily make a telling impact on the game, the fact that he came on and looked to slowly be getting back to his old self, was also, you know, putting in that effort by putting himself about, was of course good to see. Obviously Luka Milivojevic, going to give him a 6 as well. He came on for Maya, and essentially that was mainly for fitness reasons, I suppose. You know, Maya's a very creative player and could make a great impact for us, you know, in the Southampton game coming up, or the Fulham game. And of course, you know, you want to see out the game and shore up the defence. So of course Luka Milivojevic came on, helped us to, you know, shore up the game, helped us to see it out essentially. And the fact that he just gave us that extra protection defensively by, you know, Spurs brought on a few attacking substitutions, so the fact that we had that extra person, not necessarily in defence, but in front of the defence, giving us that extra protection against the Spurs team, who were slowly getting into the gears and having all of the possession. So the fact that we had someone like Luka to bring off the bench was of course good to see, and albeit he'd start other games, you know, obviously he got rested for this game, but you know, when you need to see a game out, the fact that in a cup game you can bring in some of your first team players like we did here with Luka was of course good to see. And certainly in the fact that we ended up keeping the clean sheet, obviously you've got to give a credit to the defence, because they're the guys who've done it throughout the whole game. But in terms of seeing the game out and just basically keeping us solid, you know, to see out the game, of course you've got to give Luka Milivojevic credit here. And of course Jordan Ayew, he came on quite late in the game, replaced Andros Townsend, essentially just to protect Andros Townsend, because obviously we want him, he's a crucial player in the league, so we want him to continue. So of course not really going to give Jordan Ayew a rating there. Now obviously I've talked quite a lot about the game in between the players player rating. So of course I don't really want to say too much in the summary here. You know, like I've said, it was a cup game, not as many people are interested, but I suppose the main thing for me really is that people would say Spurs were terrible in the day, and arguably in terms of their normal standard they were obviously below par, but they were no way terrible in this game. And I've seen a few people say Spurs were terrible. I think Spurs were actually relatively good in the game. It's just the fact that they weren't as good as us. On the day, we hit them on the counter-attack, we put a cross into the box, which obviously meant that they conceded a penalty. So you've got two chances there in particular where we attack them, once from wide and one from the counter-attack. So there were two chances, we scored the 2 goals, and I do think overall the fact that our game plan was to defend deep and hit them on the counter-attack, we basically done that perfectly in the fact that our goals came from counter-attacks and the fact that we defended deeply. So whilst all of the highlighting and all of the talking is going to be about Spurs not playing that great, actually if you look at the game, it was just the fact that Palace had a game plan, executed really well, and just performed better than Spurs did on the day. So personally for me, I don't want to say that Spurs were bad, because I honestly don't think they were. It's just the fact that we were better than them on the day. Now in terms of the game itself, it of course was a very physical game, you know, especially with us playing with a target man and Spurs playing with a target man. So of course we did see that, and it was really reflected in the game that of course it was very physical. And I suppose it was slightly different from a normal Premier League game, but for that reason, because it was slightly different and because we actually enjoyed it, because not only did we get a good result in terms of the 2-0 win, but also we just played well and got something from a game we deserved. So of course that was good to see. So the fact that the game was a little bit different in the fact that both teams were playing with target man, both teams were looking to, you know, hit the team with pace, you know, with Lucas Moura or for Tottenham or Zaha for Palace. So obviously it was a totally different game from what we're normally used to, in the fact that how both teams were setting up, not just because of how we played and the tactics, but actually the teams as well. The fact that both teams were playing a second string side was once again what made it such a different game. And you know, obviously people talk about depth, and I personally have said before that, well, I've said it not necessarily on the podcast, but about Tottenham in particular. You know, they've got a great squad, they've got good players to bring in, but ultimately on this occasion, because of the injuries and because they couldn't bring in certain players, it looked to most fans that we obviously had a better team. Now obviously I'm not saying that we have a better squad or a better second 11, but on this occasion they obviously stood up to the plate and of course put in a very good performance against the Spurs side. Now of course the game as a whole, you know, there's loads of massive positives for us to take from it. You know, I'm not really going to go into them now, but a very positive result. You know, Speroni breaking the clean sheet record, the back four, which is our second string back four, keeping a clean sheet, defensively solid in midfield, and the fact that we were going forward, the fact that we, you know, hit them on the counter-attack and scored the goal there, the fact that we put the defenders under pressure to score a penalty. So the fact that we performed well across the field was of course great to see, and that's obviously one of the many positives for us going forth. And of course it was nice for us to actually win a game at home this season. You know, I think that's only our fourth game or fifth game if you include the FA Cup that we've actually won at home this season. So it's nice to see us finally rewarding the fans by actually scoring at home. And of course, it's nice to get through in the cup, and hopefully we get a nice home tie for the next round. You know, round 5, I believe it is. Hopefully we can get a nice, draw there. Hopefully, maybe another home tie. But nevertheless, obviously it was great winning this game here against Spurs. But of course, games coming up. You know, Southampton, and Fulham as well. These are 2 important games. So whilst this is really great that we've won it here against Tottenham, we're into the next round. We really need to knuckle down now, work on our defensive shape and work on our attacking ability as well, because of course the games against Southampton and Fulham coming up are of course very important. So I'm now going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and why I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now obviously before the game, quite a lot of us were quite worried in the fact that Spurs, they always seem to beat us 1-0, and it was quite inevitable, even though the last time we beat them in the FA Cup we obviously went to Wembley. But of course before the game there was quite a lot of worry, you know, the attacking flair that Spurs have got, and the fact that their sort of second string, albeit is a lot weaker than their first team, it's still really good. So actually before the game, quite a lot of us were thinking, okay, it's going to be probably like the Chelsea game where we defend well, but then we concede an unlucky goal. But luckily for us, you know, we get that goal from Connor Wickham so early on in the game, and that seemed to just really set the theme of the rest of the game you know, us sitting deep, us counter-attacking, and essentially that's why we won the game. You know, we defended really well, which of course is what you want, and we just scored, you know, we scored the penalty, we got that goal as well, so we were basically very effective going forward as well. And for me, I wasn't really expecting much from this game. Obviously, you know, you have a chance, you know, whenever you're in the FA Cup or any game in that respect, you obviously have a chance of winning, but because we always seem to get beaten 1-0 by Spurs, and the fact that even though they had loads of players missing, you just think maybe they were just going to sneak it. So actually it's a lovely pleasant surprise to actually see us go through it. But in terms of the man of the match, you know, because our performance was so good, it is really quite difficult to narrow it down to 4 players. Now, I'm sure there's going to be players I've missed out on this shortlist, but for me, these 4 players in particular, for different aspects of their game, do deserve to get a little bit more recognition. Not because their performance was, you know, completely better than the rest of the team, it's just the fact that parts of their play really stood out for me. And I do think if I had enough time, I would talk about every player and why every player does deserve to be on the shortlist, because certainly, given how good our performance is, I certainly could justify having all of the players in there. But the 4 players I've gone with Julian Speroni, Joe Ward, Cheku Kouyaté and Andros Townsend. Now obviously there's quite a mix in there in the fact that we've gone for a goalkeeper, I've gone for a defender, a midfielder and a forward, so I've gone with a nice mix there, and I think it's a fairly sort of good representation of our game overall. Now of course Julian Speroni, I've talked about him quite a lot already, but of course he broke the clean sheet record for the club, you know, 112 clean sheets, which of course is a massive milestone to get to. You know, not many players in modern day football break such records. You know, yes, they can have loads of clean sheets, but it's very rare that they actually break the club's record. So the fact that Speroni's got there is obviously great to see, and the fact that he's now, you know, got yet another appearance for Palace, just to keep on adding it and basically cementing his record. Not only is the clean sheet record holder, but actually the most appearances as a goalkeeper as well. So the fact that he's now playing a few games here and there, and now just adding to that and making sure he can sort of build a bit of space from whoever, you know, from second place, that's really, you know, just showing that he's trying to cement himself in Palace history. So of course it was great to see him break that record, but aside from actually breaking that record, the fact that he's got yet another appearance to actually add to his total is of course great to see, and I think he's on 405 now, which once again, going back to modern football, it's very rare that you get a player reach that milestone. So aside from the clean sheet and getting another game for his record, he made a number of fantastic saves throughout the game, and you know, when you consider he made that mistake against Liverpool last week, the fact that he made up with a fantastic double save from Kevin Nkudu, you know, in that second half. You know, they've done a very clever free kick, and of course the ball's come to Nkudu, and he's obviously tried to get it past Speroni. Speroni makes the first save, the ball deflects out, and on that rebound, he also saves the follow-up as well. So the fact that he had the reactions to get down low in the first place, and then also get back up again to make the second save, was of course great to see. And there were a few other saves as well, one from Fernando Llorente as well. So the fact that he made a number of crucial saves in this game was of course great to see, and of course that's what you want from your goalkeeper. But the fact that he's a legend, and the fact that he made these saves, really made up for that mistake he made at Liverpool last week. And that's the thing that made it even more sweeter, because even if he hadn't have made that mistake, or you know, even though he made the mistake at Liverpool, he's still going to be a legend for everyone, and you know, that's just a mistake that everyone makes. But the fact that he made up for it with just such a good performance here against Spurs is why he does deserve to be on the man of the match shortlist. So the fact that he broke the record, the fact that he made fantastic saves, and the fact that he got a very deserved clean sheet as well, is obviously, you know, why he deserves to be on the shortlist. Now in terms of Joe Ward, once again, as a defence, we've got a clean sheet, so of course for that alone, in his contribution in that's why he obviously deserves to be nominated. But in terms of our first goal, albeit Jeffrey Schlupp done most of the work by actually running into the box, you know, getting past the player, having a shot, forcing Gazzaniga into a save, and then obviously Wickham had the follow-up in. Yes, it was mainly down to Jeffrey Schlupp, he was the main architect for that, but actually it was Joe Ward on that right hand side who actually got things going. So the reason he stood out for me is that, yes, the whole defence played really well and kept a clean sheet, but because Joe Ward had that little bit going forward, in the fact that he, you know, run the ball and found that fantastic pass to Jeffrey Schlupp. So the fact that he was involved defensively and offensively in this game was of course great to see. And essentially, you know, that goal was sort of like a domino effect. You know, once we got that goal, we settled into the game and seemed to play a lot better. So the fact that Joe Ward was involved in that was really good to see. And like I've said, it seemed to really get us going in the game. So one of the reasons for me is why he's on the shortlist is, yes, because of his defensive work, but the fact that his contribution in the build-up to that first goal was of course great to see. Now, much like like a lot of players in the second half, obviously Tottenham were literally up in the ante, putting a lot more pressure on us. So the fact that Joe Ward actually stepped up and made a number of tackles, made a number of blocks, and there was also Lucas Moura had a header through on goal. So the fact that Joe Ward defended and done really well in these sort of situations where Spurs were putting on the pressure was of course great to see. So not only, well, I suppose because he hasn't really played much this season, it's quite worrying the fact that maybe he'd come in and not necessarily be up to the standard he used to be, but the fact that when Spurs were putting on the pressure, the fact that he stood up and basically made himself counted and made in, basically made superb interventions, by stopping the Spurs players was of course great to see. And of course, to add to that really, putting his body on the line as well. I think he got a cut on his nose in the first half. There was a few other times where he obviously tried to go into challenges to block the ball on the line. So the fact that he was not only just doing his general defensive work really well, he was actually putting his body on the line and giving his all for the team. So in terms of the first two players, Speroni for the fantastic saves he made throughout the game, as well as the clean sheet, and of course Joe Ward, much the same, getting that clean sheet and just for his defensive contribution. Now moving into midfield, I picked Cheikhou Kouyaté, and to be honest, I could have picked any of the players in midfield because we all done a really great job there. But the reason I've gone with Kouyaté is that his job was to be that ball winner, win the ball in the centre of the park, and basically give protection to the back four. So the reason he stood out for me is the fact that he done both these things. He was winning the ball in the centre of the park, and when you consider we were playing a 4-4-2, or yeah, I suppose you could call it a 4-4-2 if you consider Zaha playing alongside Wickham. But whichever way you look at our formation, Kouyaté was playing in a two-man midfield, which you might think might get overrun. But the fact that Kouyaté actually stood up and actually made himself count by winning the ball in the midfield and just giving that protection to the back four to once again help us get that clean sheet and help us just to be very secure at the back. So the fact that he was involved in that in the midfield was of course great to see. But like I've said already, I could have picked any of the midfield players because I do think across the board the whole team performance was good, and especially in midfield as well. So for me, Cheikhou Kouyaté, the reason he stood out for me is just because of how well he won the ball back in midfield, and just the fact that how good his defensive work was in terms of offering protection to the back four. Now the final player on the shortlist is Andros Townsend. Now going back to the team again, I could have picked a number of players. I could have picked Connor Wickham, could have picked Zaha, albeit he wasn't the greatest in this game, but his contribution at times was good. But for me, Andros Townsend stood out for me. Now he was obviously playing against his former club, so obviously there was something to prove there, and certainly he'd done that in this game here. He scored from the penalty spot. Now personally for me, I thought Connor Wickham was going to take the penalty because he's taken penalties previously and it would have been nice for him to get a brace. But of course Andros Townsend stepped up, lovely penalty down the middle, nice power on it. So obviously getting that goal to cement our two goal lead was of course great to see. But the fact that just his general attacking play after that, and even though we were 2-0 up, we weren't stopping attacking as a team. So the fact that he was involved in that by keep putting pressure on Spurs to try and get that third goal, that goal which would have completely put the game out of reach for Spurs. The fact that he was actually looking to do that whilst he already had a goal in the game was of course good to see as well. And then literally minutes after scoring, he had a fantastic chance as well. Ball cut back to him by Patrick Van Aanholt. He's obviously had a shot and Gazaniga made a save. So you've got, he had numerous chances throughout the game to score. The fact that he got the penalty was of course great to see. And in terms of just overall, in terms of how Spurs were playing against us, obviously they were quite dominant in terms of possession. So the fact that someone like Andros Townsend was just giving us that option to actually relieve some pressure, so rather than us just passing the ball around from the back and basically trying to sort of compete against Spurs' possession, give the ball to someone like Townsend, and he basically was just running at the fullbacks, running at the centre backs, and just relieving some pressure. So overall, I do think he obviously deserves to be on the shortlist. And like I've said already, I could have picked any of the 11 players who started the game because they all performed well and certainly were very crucial for what they done, contributed individually in the team. But for me, going over it, Julian Speroni, fantastic double save as well as a few other saves in the game, and obviously Joe Ward as well, defensively very solid as well. And for them two in particular, the fact that we got a clean sheet was a good, basically they got where they deserved in terms of for their contribution in the game. They obviously got a clean sheet, which they rightly deserved. Obviously Kouyaté playing in midfield was fantastic at winning the ball back, which of course against a team as dominant as Spurs is obviously very important. And of course the fact that he gave protection to the back four was of course good to see, and the fact that it was so effective that we went on to keep a clean sheet was obviously another good thing as well. And obviously Andros Townsend scored that penalty against his former club, so the fact that he overcome that sort of, sometimes you get a bit of yeah, basically you play bad against your former side, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. So the fact that he was able to stay calm, composed, and take that penalty against his former side was also just being a very a good attacking threat for Palace was of course good to see. But for me personally, you know, when you consider this guy's played all of the, you know, so many games for Palace, and the fact that he broke a record in the game, you know, aside from his performance, you know, his performance was absolutely class, but the fact that he combined that with actually breaking a record and adding yet another appearance to his portfolio, of course, I'm going to give it to Julian Speroni. So congratulations, Julian, but you don't get a trophy or certificate, but you do get my sincere congratulations on what was a solid performance from you. And obviously, the fact that he broke the record and the fact that his performance overall was good, that's why I've nominated him and why I've given the Man of the Match award to him. But the main thing for me really, and it goes back to what I said last weekend, you know, obviously he was a legend and he made that mistake at Liverpool, but the fact that he made up for it with what could possibly be his last appearance for Palace, the fact that he made up for it with a fantastic performance, whilst also having that, you know, having the chance to break the record for clean sheets, which he did, was of course good to see. Now, like I've said, I'm giving it to any of the players in the side, but for me, Julian Speroni obviously deserves it for breaking the record and just being fantastic in goal. But of course, notable mentions do go to Joe Ward, Cheku Karte, and Andros Townsend. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings, and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Julian Speroni and Connor Wickham following the game.
First of all, congratulations on breaking the clean sheet record at the club. I think you've got all the goalkeeping records now.
All the goalkeeping. Wow, I didn't know. I thought I needed one more actually, but you just said that yeah, it was today. So yeah, I'm proud of it.
Yeah, and the game today must be really happy with the defensive performance.
It was great. I mean, the whole team performance was excellent today. We stick to our plan. Everything worked for us. Scored 2 good goals. And then obviously we needed to defend in the second half. They obviously had a very good team in possession, so we needed to be careful with that. And then, yeah, just make sure we did, keep doing what we did in the first half, and then we saw the game off.
And great for Connor Wickham to score a goal. It's been so long out for him.
So pleased for Connor. Just when he scored, I was so happy to see him, the celebration and everything. You can tell how pleased he was, and he deserved it. He worked so hard to get back, and especially when an injury like that happens, it's tough. It's very tough. So I'm very pleased for him scoring today.
And it shows. I mean, we've got a pretty strong squad at the moment. The players that came in today, everyone did well.
Yeah, that's. I mean, the Premier League and also this competition, you need a squad. You can't just rely on 11 players. You need to have a strong squad that people can come in and do a job for the team, and it's so important. At the moment, that's what we are. We're a very good squad of players.
So for the next round, what do you want? Another home time here in front of these fans?
Anything. I want to enjoy this game tonight and then think about that later.
Connor, congratulations on getting the goal. How'd that feel?
Yeah, it was a massive relief, especially in the first 10 minutes to calm the nerves of the game, and we got ourselves in the lead, which was good. And then I think we were saying at half time it could have been 4-0 if we took our chances and were clinical in the end. But I think the performance from start to finish was as professional as it can be.
And you've got great history in the FA Cup for Palace. It would be nice to go on a run, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. I think we've definitely got the squad to do it. We showed out there today that we made a few changes, but whoever the gaffer decides to put on the field can definitely put in a performance.
Yeah, it's looking pretty strong up front at the moment now, with all you guys coming back. Yeah,
it's good. Not just Wilf and Andros. We can all share the load. We've got Jordan, Christian's just come back, myself, and we look strong all the way from the back all the way to the front. So.
Yeah, Andros putting that penalty away there. Do you expect him to score that?
Yeah, I did actually. Yeah, he just put it straight down the middle, and I think it was straight down the middle. But yeah, it calmed the nerves again even more and gave us that room to build on. And as I said, we could have had a few more goals if we were clinical.
And finally, just at the back, Julian Speroni broke the club's clean sheet record. I think he holds all records for a goalkeeper at Palace now. He's been a great servant, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's been a very good servant, a top guy, and he's it's well deserved. And you can see why he's such a legend here. The fans love him. The performance he put in today, to rectify last week's performance. I think he knows, obviously what happened last week, but today he showed what a professional he is, and he's still got the attributes of a top goalkeeper.
Thanks, Connor.
Thanks very much.
Well, I've been pretty happy with the way the team's been playing for a period of time. Really, there's not been so many press conferences where I've come to them and been disappointed with the team's performance. I mean, it's just sometimes we haven't got the result that maybe you were hoping the performance would give. Today I thought that we defended well throughout the game. We had that stroke of fortune just before half-time, where after missing a chance to go 3-0 up, a very good chance to go 3-0 up, we first concede the free kick and we have to defend it with 10 men, which means that they had a spare player who would not have been spare had we had 11 players on the field. And they took advantage of that and forced Julian Speroni into 2 fantastic saves. Then shortly after that, a penalty kick, which was, a fairly not soft one, but it's an unfortunate one. A bit similar to ours, really. It wasn't one of those penalty kicks where you think someone's definitely going to score. But it is a penalty, and we were fortunate that Trippier missed that, because at 2-1 it would have been much harder in the second half. We knew they would have a lot of the ball. We knew they would swarm forward with their centre-backs and midfield players, and we had to be very disciplined to keep our shape and not to go chasing the ball and not to go trying to pressurise them too high up the field so they could play around us. And the players did that well, I thought.
Connor Wickham has scored his first goal in, I think, almost 800 days. What will that
2 years and 3 months over time.
Yeah, 799 days.
Well, it's incredible, isn't it? Well, it's a credit to him, isn't it? I thought today was a good news story for Crystal Palace Football Club with both him and Speroni. Speroni broke the record for clean sheets with 112, I think I was told, in 400 and something performances, which is appearances, which is fantastic. And especially after last week, where he had to shoulder some of the blame for the goals we conceded up at Anfield. To come back and do what he did today, that's a real good news story. And for Connor to have to fight his way back to starting a game after all that time and then to crown it with a goal, another really piece of good news for the football club and for the fans. So all round today, it's been a good day. You get these days in football from time to time. You have to they balance themselves out with the ones that aren't quite so good. But today we can leave Selhurst Park with a smile on our face and wait and see what awaits us in the 5th round of the FA Cup.
Okay.
Roy, can that be a sort of mood changer, just for league form? Couldn't it sort of kind of...
Not really, John, because the league form has not been bad. It's once again, I can't answer those questions honestly, because it would mean me accepting that our league form has not been good or we've not been playing well enough to win matches, and that's not true. We have been. The number of times we've lost games 1-0 where we could so easily have won them, by a clear margin. It's part and parcel of the game of football, especially if you aren't blessed with a team which is banging in goals left, right and centre. But I don't think we needed anything to change our approach or our attitude or our belief and confidence. That is there. What we really need is the results, which will give everyone a chance to say, well, we know it and now we've shown it. And that's the problem. We've known it, but we haven't always been able to show it. Today we've done that, but 2 very, very big games coming up for us now, or 3, Southampton, Fulham, West Ham. We've got to A, reproduce the performances, B, defend every bit as well, and C, hope that the goals we've been able to score in the last few weeks will keep flowing.
Roy, do you think Connor can make a big contribution still the rest of the season?
Well, I suppose there's only one answer to that. Of course I believe and hope that, but I think it would be putting an awful lot of pressure on him, and I don't want to do that. I mean, the fact is he's worked hard to get where he is. It's good that he's had the chance today. I mean, had it been a league game, he wouldn't have had that chance because Jordan Ayew would have played in the centre-forward position. But I decided to rest Jordan so that he could play, and he took the opportunity, which is very creditable, and I'm very pleased about. And I don't want to say anything which could even be interpreted as remotely negative, but it is 2.25 years, and the fact is coming back and playing for 70 or 75 minutes and getting a goal can't get much better than that for you. But if you suddenly believe, well, that's it now it's going to be just like it was 4 or 5 years ago when I was in my prime, I think that would be too much to ask. He's got to keep training, got to keep himself fit enough to get out to all the training sessions, which is something he's been doing now for the last 5 or 6 weeks. And in my previous year and a quarter at the club, he never had that spell of training every day. There was always a spell followed by a breakdown, followed by a new spell, followed by a breakdown. And I think the reason he's playing now and can play from the start is because he's training. And it's the reason also that Christian Benteke, who's been doing it for the last 2 or 3 weeks, can come on and give us the 15 minutes that he did.
Okay, that's it.
Well, we're pleased. Yeah, very pleased. Well, we hope he's going to give us what he gave us and was giving us before he had that very bad ankle injury. You know, before he fractured his ankle in the game against West Ham in about February, I think it was, wasn't it? You know, a year ago. We hope that January, was it? So it's almost exactly a year ago. So we're hoping that he's going to come back and give us what he gave us then, which was a boost in training every day with his joyful attitude and enthusiasm, and the fact that he's so well liked in the group. When he comes on, we can rely upon him to do the type of things we were asking him to do with the work rate he was showing at that time. I was disappointed that we didn't persuade him, or weren't able to persuade him to stay with us on the contract we were offering, because at the time there was a doubt how the ankle would go. He chose not to do that, got picked up eventually by West Brom, and we were just lucky enough to find that there was a chance to get him back. He wanted to come, we wanted to take him, and it's another very useful addition to our squad, because in those wide areas and forward areas, we are still limited to some extent because of, you know, Connor and Christian. We've still got to see how that progresses on a weekly basis. We can't be 100% certain that they're going to be able to do it until the season progresses, and having Bakary there will give us another string to our bow.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.
Good.
Cheers.
One other thing which I will say just before I leave, which I'm actually very proud of at the moment, I don't know how much press it's got, but I think the club making a decision to open its doors, if you like, and make a lounge available for people who are sleeping on the streets. I think that's a really, really good initiative, something which I'm very, very proud of. And, you know, a football match is one thing, and it's great to win a football match and come in here with a smile on your face and be able to say nice things. But I think if I was one of those many, many homeless people finding a chance to come into the warm every night, that would mean a lot more to me than winning a football match. So, just like to make that point.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Julian Speroni and Connor Wickham had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Tottenham. But make sure to come out next week for a post-match review of the game against Southampton. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.